Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
Lovely. Well, the stage is yours, Sonja. Go ahead.
All right. I'll give my best. My story is about a time when I was 9 years old. My brother is 6 years younger than me. We were in the back seat of a Mercedes Benz on our way to Italy, and it was the time when there was no air conditioning, at least in European cars at that time. So back in the 80s, it was a total hot, sweaty mess. And my brother and I started, asking, when are we there yet? About like 10 minutes into the drive. And I think we had eaten our sandwiches maybe an hour into the drive, and it was 11 hours and 50 minutes more to go. And my parents, of course, got into an argument all the time when we drove to Italy. So Italy is the favorite destination of my parents. You hear it from my accent. I'm from Germany. So we drove every year to Italy, but to different destinations. There was no Google Maps, so arguments all over the place. And they really tried to hide it, but it never worked out. And it was all about the arrival. But this particular family vacation I'm talking about was not such a great arrival, actually. We found that our place that my parents had booked also the time before internet, we didn't have it was like those catalogs when you went through, and the prices of the catalogs were in the back. So you always found like nice places. Then you had to go to all the way to the back and find the actual price of the place. And then we skipped that and found a different place. And this time we found a garage. It was pretty much like, it felt like it was a garage with a door with a gate that opened like a garage. And I think no one really had been there before. But there was it was like a resort, and there were other families and a lot of other children. And I call this family vacation the vacation of Aufklärung. And I actually looked that word up. I thought I need the English word for Aufklärung to tell you this story. But it's apparently also used in English. It's like this enlightening moment. And it was an enlightening family vacation in 3 terms. We got to meet a Swiss family with a little bit older boys than I was. So we were all excited about, going to those kids' disco nights, and like that started at 6 o'clock right after dinner. And we went there and had those parties there. And I learned I learned from those Swiss boys, I learned 2 things that I would have rather learned from my parents or from someone else who were closer to me. But this is what always stuck with me when I think about this family vacation. The first one was sex education, actually. I learned how babies come into the world. The Swiss boys told me about like the second evening at the children's disco night. The second one was a really, really sad one. I learned about Hitler and the Second World War from those Swiss boys by them telling me that they didn't like me because I was German. And I was like, who is that guy? I'm 9 years old. It's the 80s, And I would have actually loved to learn that from my parents. So kind of the conclusion from these 2 things that I learned on this vacation is for parents not to miss the point to tell your children how children come into the world, and about major history moments in your own nationality and in your own life, kind of. And the third one is actually I learned something about myself, namely my persistence. My parents bought me a pair of shoes, like they had like little heels. My first heeled shoes, and they were probably $9 or something, or my mom negotiated them down to $6.50 or something like that. And they had a little glass stone on it, and I lost that glass stone on the first night I wore those shoes. and I made my whole family and other people that we met, not the Swiss family, but another family, to go back around the entire town to find this glass stone that was probably like 10 cents worth the money, but I found it, and that was the good learning of that family vacation, I would say. And that was actually it.
Okay. Thank you, Sonja, for your story.
Thank you for listening.
All right. So now we open it up to the room. What did Sonja do well in this story? What was really good about it that she should hold on to?
And you can be totally honest. I'm German. You can be like really straightforward with me.
Go ahead, Kara.
There were a few things in your story, even though you talked about a lot of different moments actually, but a few things where I saw they were quite vivid. And so I thought that you did that well. So for example, at the very beginning, you're talking about you're in the back seat, I think, of a Mercedes, and there's no air conditioning. And that's something when you're that specific, I can put myself there and I can imagine what it is to be in the backseat of this car with my brother, and there's no air conditioning and we're on the road. Like a moment like that is so rich to help your listener imagine themselves having that experience. Another moment when you did this is talking about the catalog, and you use your hands and you're like going through the catalog, and I can picture that in my mind, and it helps me be part of the story. And then the last one with the shoes and the little heels of the shoes, right? It's just like it brings a visual to mind and helps me imagine you there and experience the story through you as well.
Thanks, Kara.
We talk a lot about in our 4 superpowers the use of detail. And one of the things that's really interesting about detail in particular is that it is helpful in driving invite curiosity, which is one of the superpowers. And it really brings people in, it gets people involved in your story. And because when you have details that are really, really specific, it helps to bring it to life. And then the tension is with another superpower, which is pick one theme, which is about making sure that the story that you tell is on point and has a message, and the details that you include should be in line with that. And so this is the tension that you're going to constantly be working through, is really how do you include details that bring people in, but not include too many, right? And this is where you can kind of play back and forth. But yes, to Kara's point, your strength in this story was that you do have rich details that bring us in immediately and get us to feel and experience the story well. Who else has something good to offer? What was great about the story? Go ahead, John.
You have your manner of speaking and stuff is just disarming, and I can tell you come across as comfortable, and you come across as like really wanting to tell your story, and if you come across as like, this is a story I want to tell, people want to listen more. I mean, I have a monotone voice and I have to tell a really good story to get people to listen to what I'm saying, but you have a disarming and kind of fun way of explaining things. So
Thank you very much. That was a surprising feedback. Thanks.
Well, I think, Sonja, actually, to add to John's comment, you smiled the whole time, right? And that comes through when you tell a story. If you're smiling, we're all kind of smiling with you because it's contagious. And so it's very powerful. It's something to remember. One last thought. Guy, Lynn, Doug, any thoughts?
I just think it's interesting to hear a story of a family vacation from not in the United States, but yet there was things that she was saying that I was like, oh yeah, that's what I was going to talk about too. That there's like a similarity, and maybe it's a generational thing too. That back in the day before Google Maps and all of that, I could nod my head and be like, yeah, we used to get lost all the time.
Yes, stories are the one unifying thing of all human beings in this world, for sure. Great. So what about opportunities for Sonja? What are some things that she could experiment with, play with, try as a way to maybe make the story more powerful? Go ahead, John.
So one of the things that makes a story is how it changes you or how it changes the character. And it would be, there's really an opportunity to draw people in at the beginning by teasing us with something about like, so this vacation was memorable to you because, and for a few reasons, but you learned some interesting things, like opening up and saying, my family, we took a family vacation when I was, like, 9 or whatever. And like, one of the reasons this trip really stands out in my memory is because of the things I learned, not the least of which is how babies are made, or something like that. Like, and then go back to the beginning and just walk us through it somewhat, like basically the way you did. But a hook or a teaser up front would really like draw us in a little bit more and create more of a continuity too. Because there wasn't a ton of continuity.
Cool. Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
John, you're speaking to our invite curiosity superpower again. And one of the strategies or techniques of invite curiosity is foreshadow. And so, yes, doing something as your first sentence. We talk so much about how your first sentence is one of the most important sentences in your story. And so if you think a little extra on how you want to open, especially if it's to drive invite curiosity or to foreshadow something that might happen in your story later, it can help to like instantly lock your audience in place. What else could Sonja experiment with?
Well, again, I just echo the positives. This was such a compelling story. I don't remember much about when I learned how babies were made, but if you can remember how it made you feel or something that was surprising to you in that moment, or how did that change the way your vacation went, I think that would really resonate and maybe help land that point a bit better, especially as you're talking about how this is informing you now and your plans for parenting and things like that.
Yeah, very good.
Go ahead, Kara.
One thing that I think is interesting, Sonja, is there's actually this story that maybe you were reaching for, right? Because this is a new experience, having to come to Story Hour and have a story. Your story actually had a lot of stories within it and a lot of possible, what we would describe as themes within it. If you're telling a story for an anecdotal purpose or to just commiserate with someone, you might talk about all of them at once, because you could be like, then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. It was just like all over the place. But if you wanted to shape the story for a specific audience or for a specific purpose, you could edge out some of the things that you included and then overemphasize some of those other things. Some of what you might focus on, for example, is that story could be a story about family dynamics alone. That story could be a story about a surprise or shifting expectations. That story could be a story about Hitler.
Identity.
That story could be a story about how, I think at one point you said parents shouldn't miss the moment of sharing something really important with their children. That could be all that the story is about, if you really immerse yourself in some of those moments and not just describing the plot or what happened, but yes, diving more into how did you feel, what was around you, what was your physical experience, what was your emotional experience, what was the experience of the other people relative to this particular theme, and really heighten those elements of it. Then you can transform something which now feels more of a this happened on my family vacation to a story that you could use to engage somebody who you're mentoring or you're chatting about parenthood or something of the like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very cool. Very good tips.
Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.